I really wanted to apply the same sort of principles and values that that we have within the voluntary sector in terms of working within charities locally, regionally, nationally, whatever your role is, in terms of affecting change within communities. And it's an unusual role that I've got within the college and within the trust. Not many educational organisations necessarily have it, but our CEO was forward thinking really in terms of recognising and understanding the immense value that both education can bring to a community, and just as importantly, the community can bring to education in terms of the experience of what our learners, our young people, our young adults, our older learners might have at any point. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is the journey that we've been on. We haven't got it all right, we haven't got it perfect, it's not finished, it's still in development. But what I will do is share our journey with you so far in terms of how this way of thinking about social impact through the lens of social values helped us, and where I think it's going to go in the future from our point of view, which might be relevant for you as you're continuing to build your organisations locally. Okay, so as Hugh highlighted there, we are an education group formed of both a large further and higher education college and a multi-academy trust. Do you want to go on to my second slide, Hugh, and then
okay,
it'll just bring it to life a little bit, or I can share whichever's easier for you.
No, I'll share. That's fine, no problem.
Cool, thank you.
Here we go.
Thank you. Yeah, so you've gone to the one with the little map. Yeah, next one. Thanks. Thank you. So Hugh touched on this really in terms of the kind of scale of our operation. But it was interesting hearing what you were saying in terms of what would you do if you won the lottery. You know what, we still feel like we need to win the lottery in the public sector. So even though we are incredibly privileged to have that amount of money that comes through the kind of various funding streams that we have from central government, from the GLA, from other kind of funding, commercial streams and what have you, honestly, there's never enough to go around because there's always so much need in terms of the need of the young people and the adults, and how expensive technology is. You know, if you'd asked me that question, I would have said, oh, actually, I'd really like better investment in terms of our technology for our learner voice. Really, we need to be listening more and more to what our stakeholders, our learners say to us on a kind of day-to-day basis. So I would like to see more investment into our technology, even though we've kind of put millions of pounds into that in the kind of last few years. There's never enough to go around. But it gives you a sense of the kind of scale of us as an organisation, and we're working really hard towards trying to make people feel, whether they're on one campus in the colleges or in a school within the trust, across Bromley, Bexley, we've got campuses for further and higher education in Greenwich, and then we've got one school across in Surrey. They're all part of one team. They're all one part of one organisation, which is passionate about enabling children and adults to progress through education, and that would create a kind of positive social impact as a result of that. And so next slide, please, Hugh. So in that sort of context, we have got one management team and one executive team that works across both the schools and the colleges. So on a day-to-day basis, I will find myself kind of focusing on either the work within the college and further and higher education, or at times I'll be working with our schools team in terms of developments within the multi-academy trust. And we did that because we wanted the benefit of learners being able to, well, teachers and learners really, to be able to connect across the organisation in terms of that shared knowledge, share expertise, economies of scale. You know, why have two CEOs when you can have one? Why have two finance directors when you could have one working across these? And there are other people that kind of sit beneath those, but there was a real kind of ambition to, a bit like you said at the start, actually, with your jigsaw, Hugh, become more than some of the parts. So we get the benefit of the perspective of the expertise of our leaders in schools who work with alternative provision, social and emotional mental health, autism, you name it, in terms of some type of specialism within education. We've probably got it somewhere within our educational provision there. And so my task really, as we formed a new group and developed a new strategy to have a positive impact on lives and communities, was to think about, well, goodness me, how are we going to measure that in 3 years' time? How will we know that we've made any difference? And that made me kind of think back to my time within the charity sector. So I worked nationally in the Youth Sport Trust and the implementation of schools and sport policy back in the early 2000s in the Labour government. And I kind of progressed through into a director role. And then I left that role, because they were always having a reorganisation. The typical voluntary sector were always having to kind of reorganise. And I then worked with Dame Kelly Holmes to set up her charity, and that turned into a job for 5 years. And I kind of thought about, what did I learn within the charity sector that would be relevant and appropriate for the kind of voluntary sector now, if I was going to kind of go back into it. And really it was about thinking about that wider impact that we can create above and beyond the normal things that we're held accountable for in regulatory terms. So of course, we're always going to focus on the quality of education, always going to focus on, are the kids attending? Are they achieving? Are they progressing into jobs? Are they progressing to their next stage of learning? We will always do that. But actually, with the privilege of 70 million pounds, whatever we are now at the moment, coming through us on a day-to-day basis, there's an opportunity for us to use that resource, that expertise, that capital estate, that staffing expertise in different ways to potentially either add value to the service that we provide and or the wider community. So I did some kind of research, did a lot of kind of analysis about what was out there in the sector. You know, I'm familiar with social return on investment, familiar with theories of change and all of that kind of thing. But what was interesting was that the social value way of thinking about impact really spoke to the wider ambition that we wanted to have as an organisation as a whole. And so we developed our first group strategy. Next slide, please, Hugh. Thank you. Which was really a plan to take us on that journey of like, so how do we think about not just delivering education, delivering carpentry or special educational needs provision, whatever. How do we translate that into a different way of thinking and operating as a business overall? And this is all on our group website, by the way, if you want to have a look at it in more detail. Next slide, please, Hugh. And so we developed a long strategy. There's a long version of it, and then this is a shorter version of it. But we tried to position ourselves more as a social enterprise from the point of view of being more, you know, I think there's a lot for business to learn from the voluntary sector in terms of its agility, its responsiveness, how close you are to stakeholders, how on the ground you can be in terms of really understanding what issues are and challenges are and what opportunities are. That's a real strength of the sector. So I wanted to bring some of that thinking and that knowledge into the world of education, into academia. You know what, sometimes in education we can think we know the answers and actually we probably don't. What we need to know is how to ask the right questions to get to where we need to go to. So it's kind of applying some of the wider kind of thinking from the voluntary sector into that. And we scoped out a range of plans, range of activities that we or areas of focus that we wanted to kind of build on over the course of the next few years. And next slide, please, Hugh. And so how we did that was, I realised that we needed to have some key partners to help us on this journey. So I looked externally for two agencies who were, in my view, leaders or interesting thinkers in this field. One was the Social Value Portal, who have worked with the local government association to develop the what's called the TOMS framework. I'll talk more about that later. It stands for Themes, Outcomes and Measures. And the reason I like that in particular is because it had a significant evidence base sitting behind it in terms of the value of various metrics which related to those themes. And it kind of spoke the language of our sector, because we are measured, like you are, we're measured to death on many, many different things. And we talk about work experience, and we talk about employment outcomes, and we talk about progression, and lots of different kinds of things actually was in our kind of playbox, if you like. And so I could see that having a nationally recognised, substantive, evidenced, you know, really substantial framework to use as our evaluation approach would be helpful. But we also knew that we didn't have all the answers, we still don't, and that we needed to kind of understand on that journey as we started to implement this way of thinking, what are we doing well, what do we need to do differently, and who can help challenge us in that space. And so we started to work with the Centre for Local Economic Strategies, who've done a lot of work in this space in terms of how you build what they call community wealth, which I think is what we're all about, really. You know, we want to create places where people enjoy living there, working there, want to spend time themselves with their families, make it a safe space, a place where people think, yeah, Bromley is a great place for us kind of to do our business and to build our lives. So using that framework and using the input and expertise of the Centre for Local Economic Strategies, we started measuring some of what we do. And we were able to add it up. It's got a numerical value in social value terms using this framework to be able to demonstrate in terms of a pilot in the first instance, just using a small amount of our work to learn how to do this work. In 2018, it was 6.3 million. It was a very small kind of pilot study to 21 million in 1920, and then across the group, incorporating, there's still lots more work for us to do in our trust, but across the group for the moment, we've just gone up in the past year to 36.7 million pounds of social value. And the reason I know that's accurate is because we have it independently verified externally by the social value portal. So it's not just my team that's adding up the data and put it into a spreadsheet and arriving at that. We do get challenged quite rightly by our kind of external partners in that way. And to do that, we basically increased our commitments to increasing social value across our organisation. Obvious one being procurement and local spend, but it can be much more than that as well. And I'll talk about aspects of that in a moment in terms of how we're trying to think about that going forwards. And as a result of this direction of travel, we're the first FE college in the country to be using this framework and thinking this way. And we actually got recognised last year for that as a public sector leadership award, which we were really chuffed about because we were up against large housing associations and councils and all sorts of people. So it was nice to have some of this thinking and kind of pioneering thought, really, in some ways, recognised in that way. And interestingly, it was also recognised by the Times Educational Supplement Awards as well, which is like the Oscars for us in our world. So, you know, this work is not just kind of thing that we have sitting on a shelf as part of a strategy and we kind of think about it once a year. It's embedded in all that we do. There's still loads for us to improve, no question about it, but it absolutely is part of our DNA now. And more recently, I've been working with Bloomberg, who are advising pro bono, the GLA through pro bono support at the moment on their anchor institution strategy. They've got a new part of the London Recovery Board, and the agenda for recovery in London is focusing on how to bring together organisations with significant footprints and opportunity within communities as anchor institutions to create community wealth and generate social value. So I've helped them design the impact framework for that over the course of the last few months. So how did we do it? How did we get to ourselves to this point? Next slide, please, Hugh. So always people come first. You've highlighted that in terms of your investment. So, you know, one of our primary kind of areas for focus in the first instance was making sure that we were taking staff, our colleagues, on that journey. Next slide, please, Hugh. And so over a period of time, we kept having conversations with staff, with colleagues about, well, what does this work mean? What does it look like? What does it mean for us in terms of our curriculum intent? What does it mean in terms of how we manage our estate? What does it mean for us in terms of how we do our procurement and our finance? What does it mean for us in terms of our performance appraisal systems and all that kind of stuff? These sorts of conversations we had. And we arrived at publishing the strategy. And then next slide, please. And we basically have worked hard over that period of time to try and embed the strategy across all parts of the organisation in terms of every time a new aspect of strategy is developed. So we're developing an estate strategy at the moment in terms of how we're going to redevelop each campus over the course of the next kind of 5 to 10 years. Having social value at the heart of how we think about that is part of that. And some of that might be about how the estate gets redeveloped and built. So for example, we are in the process of redeveloping our campus in Plumstead. In the way that we approached that, we didn't have enough money to build it, and we managed to get £10 million from the GLA to help towards it, but it was actually a programme which is about £35 million to redevelop the campus. So we sold part of our campus to a local housing association, L&Q, to had a very similar social purpose and social mission. And as a result, we've got a co-designed scheme where a new campus will be being built in the next few years, and new houses, new homes for local people being put in there. A significant number of them are which fall into the affordable and social housing space, way above the mayoral strategy or requirement of, I think it's 30%. I think ours is at about, want to say about 50. I'd need to go back and check the figure, but it was significantly higher. And so us having that social outlook still made business sense for us in terms of how we developed the campus, but how we thought about using our space and our estate in the future enabled us to effectively, all being well, a new campus, new homes for local people in terms of how to thinking about our estate. So in essence, we've embedded the principles of social value and the framework into everything that we do, and we measure it. Every year it gets reported to our board in terms of the metrics that we're trying to kind of improve in that way. And the other aspect of this work always is developing new partnerships to challenge us and help us take this work into further directions. And this might be areas that we can collaborate on going forward. Next slide, please, Hugh. So during the pandemic, we were fortunate. We continued to have our funding coming through to us from central government, and we knew that that was an incredibly privileged position to be in. And so we developed a range of campaigns. One of them where we were supporting local food banks, as you can see in the Great Inspirations thing there, got picked up by government and went into an international campaign. Bizarrely, that was just dropping some stuff off to one of the providers in Orpington. I went and took that photograph. It feels strange to me that that ended up being a photograph that went around the world as part of the Great Britain International campaign, but it did get kind of focused on. But what we did with the food bank and the Good For Me brand, which I'll talk about later, was mobilised our staff and students to say, you know what, we're really fortunate. We've got jobs. You're still in education, and yeah, it's hard and things are really tough. But there's an awful lot of families out there that are having much harder times. So let's do what we can to support them. And so staff started donating coffee money if they were able to, food donations, all sorts of things. And we've ended up raising during the lockdown, I think it was about £42,000 with a network of colleges locally. 36 colleges came on board with us nationally to say, yeah, actually, we'll support our communities too, and mobilise that. Carried on to not just last Christmas, but the Christmas before. We carried it on and raised over 20,000 items to be donated to food banks nationally. And as a result of that, we've now developed a wider collaboration network through colleges called Good For Me, Good For FE, in terms of contributing to your community, volunteering in your community is good for you. We know that. And actually, it's really good for colleges to be doing that in terms of supporting their colleges, their kind of colleges locally. So we now have, I think it's 128 colleges nationally who are joined in with us on this sort of campaign in terms of contributing locally. So how we are built on those partnerships and measure our impact, just a little bit more detail on this. And next slide, please, Hugh, and then the next one called our approach. So as I said briefly earlier, the way that we've enabled ourselves to progress in this way is using the framework of the National TOMS framework and the social value portal as a tool. It can be a bit complicated when you look at it at the first glance. You're probably looking and go, oh my goodness, it's like there's so much detail in there, and there is, but we select out what is relevant and appropriate for our kind of offer and our provision. And we've worked with Claire's in terms of helping us understand what are we doing well, what's not strong, where do we need to be focusing in terms of how we progress going forwards. Next slide, please, Hugh. And just this gives you a little tiny bit of a snapshot. This is a very simplified version of the framework, but it gives you a sense of why that probably spoke to us in terms of our agenda. It focuses on local skills and improve employment, growth of responsible local business, healthier, safer, more resilient communities, decarbonising and safeguarding our world, and social innovation. There's nothing in there that probably most of us on this call are not interested in or have got some type of connection to on many of those agendas. And how that then translates into outcomes with metrics attached to them is kind of detailed on the slide there in terms of some of the outcomes that we will want to see. That is a very simplified version, I would say, though. Next slide, please, Hugh. So an example of some of our work in 2021, again, using the social value framework to, sorry, I'm just following my slides so I know where I'm at. So the kind of key measures that worked for us, what we selected out, including new ones designed in partnership with the social value portal. We use a range of data from a range of departments. This always makes me smile. Developed group strategy office. We do, but it's actually me and a graduate intern that does most of this work. So it doesn't have to be a massive team of people necessarily to kind of think about this, although I do appreciate resources stretched. And we also do a social action drop-in once a week for half an hour, where we invite any members of staff who'd like to come and meet myself or any of my team to talk about the work that they're doing on their campus or in their communities around social action. It's very informal, but it's been interesting because people have enjoyed it and they've wanted to be part of it, and then they take the mantle on and they go on. Next slide, please, Hugh. So in terms of our data in the last year, that gives you some examples of how in social value portals terms, utilising the resource that we do have through central government funding and other means, this is the added value that we've been able to kind of generate in terms of the wider kind of work that we do. And Claire's has supported us on that journey, as I talked about earlier, and identified areas in which we could develop further in terms of procurement, use of land and assets, understanding more of our contribution to the, sorry, next one, please, Hugh. Our contribution to the local economy. You know, we employ about 1,300 staff at the minute, and I think it's about 700. Last year it was 735 were employed locally. Now, if you think about that in terms of having just that as a principle of, can we employ local people to staff our teams, you're already securing and supporting benefit in the community in terms of enabling people to pay their bills, pay their council tax, spend money within the local economy, and so on. So, you know, part of that kind of local principle in terms of having local people supporting and employed within our business is a kind of key element of that. And as I said earlier, we have been recognised nationally for some of that kind of work. And then just finally, before I pause, and really happy to have any questions that people might have. Next slide, please, Hugh, and one again. So the principle of what I was just talking there in terms of local people, what we're doing is applying that way of thinking and approach to our core business and the way in which we work with other partners. So if you think about the pressures on the NHS and healthcare professionals, full stop, at the moment, we can't get enough people. Can't get enough people, A, full stop, and B, trained into these sorts of roles. There's burnout. People are absolutely shattered through the pandemic. You know, it's a real challenge in the whole of the workforce across the NHS, and actually this is true across other sectors as well. So we are continuing to develop our relationships with the NHS Confederation. I'm due to meet with the ICS team and the CCGs in the next couple of weeks to understand a bit more about their kind of emerging new structures. We've been working with Jackie across at Bromley Healthcare to talk about, well, if you can't get the people that you need into all the amazing jobs that you've got, and we've got kids who need jobs at the end of their career, end of their college courses, and or we've got adults coming to us for employment, we can work together in partnership to solve that issue. So we get the benefit. The kids have progressed into brilliant careers, and we're still developing a lot of this work. It's not all sorted or by any stretch, but the principles are there. But they then get the local health network they need in terms of people that don't have to be, no disrespect at all to our international recruitment in the health service, because we've needed it, but they don't necessarily need to be recruiting nurses from India and the Philippines and other associated allied health professionals, if actually we could be growing more of our own within our own communities. And ultimately that becomes more sustainable for the kind of overall workforce in the future, really, because you've got local people who want to stay and live within given areas and continue to progress within them. So that's one little example of how we've worked with health. Next one, please, Hugh. And then I touched on this earlier, good for me, good for FE, but we've been working with a number of national partners on this in terms of connecting colleges into large national charities who have networks locally. But, you know, one of the things I'd really like to look at is how can we connect our workforce locally here in Bromley into the local voluntary sector. And this was work that we were literally on the cusp of starting to do this just before the pandemic hit. I had Christopher and Diane from Community Links come in and meet here. And then, of course, the world went to hell in a handcart really briefly for 2 years. So we move on. But I'd, you know, really like to talk about, well, how could we plug our student body? How could we plug our staffing body? We give our staff up to 5 days a year for volunteering. Not everybody chooses to use it, but they can. How could we be unlocking that resource, that's expertise, to potentially work with some of you partners in the voluntary sector locally to kind of help with some of those capacity issues you talked about earlier? Next slide, please, Hugh. And then finally, obviously, major emphasis on sustainability, the green economy and net zero. And we continue to focus on that both in our curriculum design and delivery, but also how we operate as a business and how we kind of think about the development of our estate, and then how we partner with people. So we've literally just been awarded new mayoral academy status from the GLA to work with I think it's 8 other colleges and about 11 local authorities. And actually there's a launch of that going on as we're speaking today. And we've got a parallel research launch today with that programme, talking about the opportunities that net zero is going to afford for communities, businesses across East London and the South. That all plays back into the TOMS framework, because in the environment, sustainability, net zero, all of those elements are relevant in social value terms. And the only other final thing I would say before I answer any questions that you might have is that if I were back in, actually I'm doing it already, I don't have to be back in your shoes, but when I'm talking to commissioners now, or when I'm talking to funders, you know, about contracts or services that we can provide, I add into those proposals and those tenders the social value contribution that we can make, because it's relevant and it's appropriate and it makes a difference within local communities, and it's increasingly a common language that people are using. You know, there was social value has been built into central government procurement as kind of requirement from January of last year. So for you in your roles trying to bring in that income into your various charities across the sector locally, being able to demonstrate the community impact or community wealth building that you've got through the values of social value should add value to your proposal in terms of how you can kind of benefit the difference that you'll make. And I've got a real live example of that myself at the moment, where I'm talking to one of our local authorities about one of the spaces that we use. It's a centre. It needed lots and lots of investment in terms of the capital estate had gone into disrepair when we inherited it, and we've put quite a lot of money into it, as has the local authority. And now we're in a conversation about, well, what should the lease be going forward? And interestingly, because of the work that we've had, that we've undertaken in terms of the contribution that we are making locally in social value terms, they are open to the conversation of it not just being about you know, how much money do we pay on the lease? We haven't agreed it yet, but the dialogue has changed. It's gone from just transactional of like, well, you can have the building for this much money, to, ooh, actually, there's much more value that you can bring to the community, which matters to us, and that's valuable. So let's have a conversation about how much money that is then. So it's all helping us to kind of develop our business going forwards. So I think that's probably enough for you, I think, there.
Thank you very much, Louise. I was muted because there's some drilling going on next to us, so hopefully it doesn't return. Now, thank you. That's very, very detailed, and I think and some bits of it. There's 2 slides in particular I actually want to study and sort of memorize and burn into my brain, sort of around how you measure stuff. And we're going to invite questions. from anybody. And I'm just, because I always, these things always fly to my head. I remember many decades ago when I was working with a training, someone who provided training to people 16 plus. So it was NACRA actually, and they provided training to young people based in Westmore at the point in time. I did mechanics, I did carpentry like you, Louise, and something else, IT. And I suddenly realized that for those young people, we had such a narrow focus. It was just, we teach you stuff, we train, you get an NVQ, and none of the other things, the holistic things that you're doing. But then I think it made such a, if I had it to do again, obviously I wasn't the CEO, if I had it to do again, I'd love to try and bring some of your thinking about the wider impacts and benefits you can bring.
Yeah, and I probably didn't make that clear enough, but we think that, and there's not enough of this at the moment, this is an area still for development to help. We need to do better in helping our teachers and our curriculum managers fully grasp the opportunity of this. But bottom line is, if we were able to create more community opportunities and projects where our learners are live on the job within the community testing their skills, that will inevitably help them further develop and improve their employability chances when they do progress into their careers. So if they were doing a refurbishment of a playground in a park, they would need to talk to stakeholders, they'd need to kind of find out the needs, they would need to put a proposal together, they'd need to do a budget, they'd need to go and find a funder, all of those sorts of things, the kind of skills that you need to be entrepreneurial when you're starting your own business or kind of working in any company. We know that those are essential communication skills, interpersonal skills, business planning skills, and we want to see more opportunities for our learners to be able to do that in a live working environment, not just in work experience, but actually within and connected to the voluntary sector and other organisations locally in that way. But it's just a journey we're on, because understandably our teachers are under pressure and they go, oh, got to get through the units, got to get through this, got to get through that. It's like, yep, but this is the same way, it's just working in a slightly different approach.
Yeah, thank you. That's really useful. Any questions? I've got a few, but I won't kick off. I'll let other people. Does anyone want to ask Louise anything? We will make the slides available on our pop. I said there's a couple of things I certainly want to memorize, because I mean, the question of how we capture and report is really key. And there's some very interesting ways of doing it. But Helen, do you want to unmute and ask? Still muted.
Sorry. Yeah, mine's not so much of a question, I'm not sure. And I'm happy to look extremely ignorant after 20 years in the voluntary sector. I am not confused, but I would love to hear from you, Hugh, maybe, or Louise, you might also want to jump in, but what the purpose of bringing this to us is, if you see what I mean. I'm not trying to be difficult, although I'm naturally difficult, but it feels like the private and public sector have obviously lots of money, they might argue, but compared to us, that they have respected professionals who are kind of highly trained, valued, their educational levels and their kind of business acumen is top notch. There's all of that stuff flying around within those sectors. And now they're working really hard to prove their social value. And the charity sector is ram-packed with nothing but social value. So what are you saying to us? That this could be useful for us to prove our social value, or that these sectors want to work with us to help us to help them to have more social value? I'm just kind of trying to find the context to it. If you see what I mean, there's loads of really useful things that you've said. It's brilliant, it's all really positive, but as an actual context, I'm not sure I understand what we're doing.
So I can respond. So I think you've asked some good questions. I don't know if Louise, you wanted to say anything first, and then let me respond, because I think you've asked some good questions.
Yeah, okay. I think it's a really fair point, Helen. I think it's both. I think the voluntary sector is significantly undervalued and under-recognised in terms of the contribution it makes. And we saw this through the pandemic. It was people like yourselves and multiple other groups locally that were stepping up and making a difference and actually making stuff happen, you know, and people know that really, but actually it gets overlooked in terms of government funding and resource. And so, you know, if I were in your shoes, I'd be thinking, right, okay, is there a language? Is there a way in which we can play the game, if you like, when you're talking to funders, thinking about contracts and tenders and bids, that's relevant and appropriate in terms of the language of central government and other funders increasingly, if that's where their eyes are, realising actually you can't just keep funding public services, you need to create above and beyond. That puts you, I think, strongly in that space to absolutely articulate all the amazing work that goes on already on a daily basis within the charity. It almost brings it into maybe another space in terms of the metrics, which have been validated by the ONS in that way, in terms of the actual validity of the data that sits behind the framework. That's how I probably would think about it.
Yeah. I think you raise a good, yeah. So I think you raise a good point, Helen, in terms of, and you're absolutely correct. And if you've been on some of our earlier things, I think even the one session we had in January, and the one we had probably March before that, our speakers then and other speakers since have said that actually you're absolutely correct. The voluntary sector does nothing but social value, because that's what we set up for. You set up to look at a particular cohort of beneficiaries and produce greater value for them to sort of liberate their aspirations and what have you. So you're absolutely correct about that. I think social value is in part about reporting our impact and our benefits beyond deliberate outcomes. It's an area where for a variety of reasons, I think because we're not making a product to sell or to outsert or to be a better hotel than somebody else, we don't necessarily shout about it as well as we should. And in fact, I think the sector in general is relatively weak at selling its benefits, impacts, outcomes, all interrelated. So that's one part of the question. There's a sense in which you're right. We shouldn't be asked to prove our value, but I think there's a sense in which we need to be able to better demonstrate our value, and that will, as Louise quite rightly said, if you are going for contracts, and there's since last January, whether it's central government or local government, and I suspect statutes like NHS will go that way, they'll begin to ask you about what value you create, and particularly on certain themes. And I think there's another sense in which, as an evolution from outcome to social return on investment, there's a sense of what are the big themes in society today. Employability is one. You work with autistic young people, so there's a range of things you could work on, but how do you deal with the things around employability? How do you deal with things around people's well-being? How do you report? How do you deal with things around economic inactivity? How do you deal with equalities? And these are all big themes, and the environment. These are all big themes, the major themes of social value. And I think there's a sense in which you could almost argue that the government, and not being political now, is co-opting us all into being part of the solution. So if we look at the environment now, that now has a lot of social traction. It gained critical mass. So whereas 3, 4, 5 years ago, talking about the environment, it was perhaps quote unquote tree huggers. We now are all getting to the point where we realize actually this is very serious, and we all need to do our point. There's somebody who normally comes on these workshops, so that's their particular focus. And I've spoken with about what we can do. So there's a range of responses. So it's not about, and I think, not to give too long a thing, there is a sense where I think the sector has been undervalued, and that's part political and part ignorance. There are some people who simply don't get the voluntary sector, and I think if we embrace that, we'll understand why it is even more critical just to be so serious about collecting data and to build that in, not at the end of delivery, from the conception, from you conceive a piece of work through to delivering, through to the end point. I think the last thing I would say, I think funders will go there as well. So contracts is great. You might say, oh, well, we're not going to go for a £500,000 contract or 10. You might say that, and that would be fair. I think funders will go there as well, and we will begin to talk about additional benefits. So, I mean, does that sort of shed a little bit more light on the why we're doing it?
Yeah, I think so. It just is a sense of course, always that it's actually a bit like being autistic. We've been told that we have to fit in with the mainstream world. We have to play the game. We have to find the correct social language. And actually, it should be the rest of society that's also looking to find and access ours. And that feels the same a bit here with the voluntary sector and the statutory and private sectors. That is it an equal two-way conversation of learning and listening, or is it just you've got to play our game in order to access basically money, which is what it comes down to?
Yeah,
it's an answer. I'm just
yeah. No. And it can seem that cynical. I'm not saying that you're cynical, but because most voluntary sector groups, certainly the ones that I know of, they're not necessarily living from hand to mouth. I know some are, but there's always a sense of chasing money. And there isn't a sense where people know exactly where their funding is for the next 5 years. So they say they don't need a fundraiser. They're happy. They know it's never that simple and stress-free. So there's a sense of which we always do feel as if we're having to sort of jump through loopholes. But I think also I'm a very strong believer in reflective practice. And I think part of this is about reflecting on, okay, are we delivering on our stated outcomes or intended outcomes well enough? But also, when we look at our beneficiaries, that's why I had that stick man person, much as part of goes on to a bit more training, is what are when we deal with that group, that individual, what more do they want? What more can we do for them or help them to do? And so it's that wider, it's that wider thinking, and it's no longer a sense where well, that person over there does the environment, that person does mental well-being, we do X. It's trying to. And another key thing that we've been trying to, because you mentioned who's listening. Part of all this is we've tried and not got as far as we wanted, is to try and have a debate with our local authority, and I'm not knocking Bromley because they delivered one of our very first workshops, to have a debate with people who procure services and say, actually, can we have this discussion about, as frontline deliverers, what we think people need, for we understand what we as a stakeholder, as a provider needs, to sort of perhaps modify the way services are procured. Because one of the conversations I have had is that a lot of people think that the way stuff is procured isn't necessarily the most effective way. And you only change it. Either they have a road to Damascus, I've seen the light experience, and suddenly change the way they do things, or we have a discussion with them and say, actually, have you thought of this? This is our experience. Perhaps you could do it that way. And this is part of that journey. So if we ever got to say a broader network of people who do social value, and again, it's on one of the slides, it would actually ask who needs to be there. Do we need public sector, private sector people to be there because they are the ones who potentially provide jobs for some of your young people? Do we need people from the local authority there because they too are the ones who might have the money to actually procure services in a particular way, which might be more beneficial for our service users? That's the kind of conversation that we want to have, as opposed to a one-way, them telling us and we listen and jump. Anybody else want to come in? Say anything? Tracy's thing. Oh,
Hi, hello. Hi, Louise. Thank you very much. It was really interesting, actually, to get the picture of what's been happening across your group. Couple of things that spring to mind. Just currently everyone's probably aware on this call about the new ICS and the requirement for them to involve around the table, really at strategic level, our sector. So that's going on at the minute, and which addresses some of what Helen's saying, I think, about equal voice in that sort of arena. And the other thing is quite a sort of practical, small thing, actually, Louise. I just wondered, I saw something from UCL this week. They've got a program, I think it's Get On Board or something like that, and they're opening up opportunities for voluntary trustee roles amongst their student and staff population, and trying to match them with community groups and charities in their local area. And I thought, oh my goodness, you know, because I think finding that input for organisations at trustee level is always an ongoing, you know, never-ending task to fulfil that board requirement. And I just wondered whether you thought about doing anything like that locally.
Yeah,
because
really
I did inquire as
yeah.
to UCL, and I think they're limited to
No,
boroughs where they're very, you know, because they, like you, it's local build, giving back to the community, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. No, really open to having that conversation. There are a lot of people actually within the college in particular, and in the trust as well, who already play those sorts of roles. Like myself, aside from my day job, I sit on the South East London Chamber of Commerce, and I'm a trustee for a National School Improvement Charity and an academy trust in Bexley as well. But I always look at the local stuff that comes up and think, oh, if I wasn't already on 3 other boards, I'd probably come and help out with that. I really would, you know what I mean? Because I've supported charities for kind of years. And I do think there's probably some connectivity in terms of actually when we've got these opportunities that are coming up within our voluntary sector locally, for us to proactively work with you in social media terms and through our internal comms to make it available. And if staff want to choose to come and do that, because it's great for their professional development as well in terms of what they'll learn and be able to contribute further in terms of their own core roles, really. You know, I've seen a couple of treasurers come up recently, and I've tagged our group finance director and said, you know, Kofu, if you've got anybody in your network who'd be interested there. So I think we can collaborate on that.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. You give everyone, your staff, the opportunity to take 5 days volunteering, and that would pretty much, you know, that would almost cover a trustee role.
Might be we need to find a few, make a story of a few, and celebrate those, and then kind of escalate that, you know. But as always with volunteering, the person's got to really want to do it, haven't they? You know, you can't.
No,
you could nudge a little bit, but people choose to do that.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Helen has a question.
I'm just going to jump in quickly on the back of that one, because I didn't exactly hear what Sue said. I've got some young people at my car, but I was thinking when you were talking about the volunteering, Louise, you know, lots of corporates do this. It's a brilliant thing. It absolutely is. But actually, I feel like that could be developed to longer term partnerships. Yeah. For example, within the sector, we're always looking for, and this may be where you went, so just shut me up if it was, you know, accountants, business, you know, infrastructure people, all sorts of different skills. And could it be embedded in you're thinking at some point in the future that actually we're going to choose some charities or work with some charities to have a long-term kind of ongoing impact, because we may only need a finance officer 3 hours a week. Yeah. It might be, and could that actually just be part of their role, embedded in that role when they go for that job? Actually, you know, this many hours a week you work for this. Do you see what I mean? Like, so it's not just, we struggle because we've always got Barclays coming. Oh, we can come and do a volunteering. Oh, we can paint your building. It's like we want it every day. We need something more ongoing, more commitment, more kind of like this kind of thinking, you know, on a more regular not staff meetings but trainings or team development, and that's much more kind of useful, I think, rather than
the one-off stuff is more resource. More, you know,
we
more
have to think of something for you to do.
I get that. And not everyone's just. No, I was going to say, not everybody wants you on the 6th of July on the Wednesday, do they? It's just like, come on. I get it. Okay. No, we can think about that. I mean, I'm not pretending to be able to fix all the ills of the world, because I recognise them. You know, I had a similar sort of situation up in North Kensington, actually, where, you know, people would pop up constantly wanting to come and do something or other for the community, and realising actually the community is fine, thanks very much, but there are some underlying issues and challenges that structurally need to be addressed collectively, which is, I think, where I'm coming from in this wider kind of social value agenda, I think, really. So, okay, Hugh.
Right. Thank you. You see me tilting because I'm struggle to multitask. Perhaps but I think I may have found a link that will actually now allow you to actually access the evaluation form. So try that one. I think that one works. But no, I think it is very useful. One of the challenges that we have in Bromley is actually the dynamics of where we work, and And you know, I'd never accuse our council of not being supportive. And the fact that they actually have and support a third sector organization is a major plus, because believe it or not, of the 32 boroughs, not everyone has. Right? And regardless of their political complexion, you'd be surprised what goes across London. So I think we're very grateful to have one. And I think it's you know, yeah, how do we co-opt the both our local authority and our resident sort of private sector to be more involved in this discussion? Because there's a lot that we can do. And if you think of where we're at now, when people thought about social value, people thought about, COVID hadn't been invented. I shouldn't use the word invented. We hadn't had a pandemic yet. It wasn't invented, it happened naturally, apparently. But part of one of the big things that social value is now asking is what's our contribution towards post-COVID recovery? And we're all going to be co-opted into that, because we've gone through something that we will talk about for the rest of our lives, which is going to have a massive impact on economies and lives. I mean, people have been damaged. I mean, even if we didn't get sick, the fact that you had to be isolated, for some that was whether young people or old people, that's going to have a massive effect. So we're all being asked to make a contribution. I'm looking straight at Tracy, because Tracy told me a really heartwarming story of a piece of work they did early in the pandemic, which nobody had planned for, and how they would you can say more on it if you want, Tracy, how they would go out to people who suddenly found themselves isolated and couldn't go out to shop, yeah, and they took stuff to them. And you're not doing that for brownie points unless you have to put on your website, but it's worth capturing. But going forward, that is the type of thing we'll be doing. So, you know, as we move towards no restrictions, and that's probably the right and logical thing to do at some point in time, how do we then deal with those people who are terrified that they may come out and catch something? If you're 60 plus or 70 plus, you know, had the jab, not had the jab, or had the jab and realize that you can still get it after having the jab and the wretched thing. How do you deal with that sense of insecurity? How do you deal with a sense of loss when you've lost a whole bunch of people in your peer group? And somebody has to be part of that. And so I think it's how do we co-opt a range of people to actually work so we get better outcomes, but also to some extent talk about and report back on that. And there are different ways. I think the framework Louise shows very interesting. The bits that I took, I know Tom's can be quite a dense. I think it's actually just a modified Excel spreadsheet, but it's excessively modified.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But I just think about the principles of it, really. I mean, I think a lot of it does come from the local authority in the first instance. Sorry, Tracy, you want to come in there?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think where we struggle as a community group is recognising our social value. I think we all know what we do, but I think it's kind of recording it, demonstrating it, and then you know, kind of, and in terms of bidding for contracts and things like that side of it, I think that kind of we just take it for granted because we do it every day, we do it day in, day out, so we don't actually recognise as much as maybe you know, like a bigger organisation. What we actually do is more, has more impact. You know, kind of as you said, you know, kind of when that phone call came from a lady up down in Cornwall to say that she's got a neighbour living like close to town hall, nobody's heard from him for 4 days and they don't know if he's got any food or anything like that. Kind of, we just went round to the house, knocked on the door,
yep,
did his shopping and kind of kept in contact then. But kind of, what did we do about it? How did we report that? How did we, you know, kind of, we just do it because it's what we do. But kind of, I think for us as organisations, that we do not shout about it enough. We don't shout about our impact. We don't shout about what we do and why we do it better. And I don't think, I don't think that councils also appreciate that and recognise it either. So I don't think that the councils, you know, I think that some of the funders do, but I don't think that the councils recognise, you know, kind of, as you know, we've been talking to our local council about why we shouldn't pay rent this year, you know, kind of, and we're having to demonstrate to them why we shouldn't. But, you know, we know why we shouldn't. You know, we know that we're actually meeting a lot of jobs that they should be doing and they're not doing. We're actually doing a lot of that work, and if we wasn't doing it, they would have to do it. So, but I suppose you get to a stage where you feel like, why are we having to prove this to you? Why do we have to do this? You know what we do, you know about us, you know enough about us, but it becomes frustrating. I don't know about everybody else feels like that, but
and that is partly about the dynamics of the borough and why do we have to prove it, and the likelihood, and it was said last time actually, the likelihood is that they do know. Not everybody values the sectors. Some people have a very simplistic narrative, private sector good, public sector bad, but it's not always as simple as that. I think being able to quantify and verify and prove in black and white is important. I think. Sorry, I've given up on I've given up on the.
The other thing that I would say is, I personally don't think that we have enough time in our day to do that kind of work, to kind of write those impact statements, do all of that. And that's probably, kind of where we go back to, if we had money, what would we do? We'd have more staff, because then we'd have someone that did that kind of work for us.
I'll take it. I take your point, Trace. I'm going to go on to Helen, but I think in part that's why we're here to help you, because if we'd gone through the slide, I'll probably have a look at two things. It just asks, what can we do to help you in terms of impact and social value? Who else do we need to invite to the party to talk about it? But Helen, let's go over to you.
I thought some of the things that Tracy said were really, really poignant. Like, it's what we do should just be the title of some major examination document on the voluntary sector, and why we do it and how we do it better. But anyway, following from that, I think the only idea that I would be happy to see in place right now after today, not sure how it's going to happen, Hugh, this is up to you, is to listen to the fact that we're all saying we don't have capacity, right? We don't, and it's obvious. Why is the voluntary sector so bad at collecting this information? Because we just do it. And you know what? We'd rather spend the money and time on helping another 5 families than writing a report on why we've done it to the last 5 families. And that's just a fact, right? No matter how many games we play and how brilliant we are at talking to the local authority, which we do, we negotiate and navigate it all and everything else. However, the statutory sector or somewhere like CLB could find some project person to identify the social impact of every organisation working in the voluntary sector within their borough and present that back to the borough. The voluntary sector saved the local authority £15 billion a year. Boom, see you later, done. We shouldn't necessarily be needing to do it. Let's see if organisations like Community Links, like the VSSN, which meets next week, so maybe it could be brought up there, when the voluntary sector comes together, could that be commissioned? Instead of us having to fill out a TOMS form or whatever, TOMS or somebody else employs somebody to actually do that piece of work and work out how much the voluntary sector is paying. That doesn't serve them, right? So I'm not sure it's going to happen. But that is what is required, because small community groups cannot do it and will not do it and will continue to be undervalued because they can't do it. Anyway.
I think that's what you said is very valid, very true. And I'm looking at Kristen because part I was just emailing about this form that I can't get to. It would be as a research thing on her shoulder. I want to ask her what her take on it is. But I think what you say is very valid, and in part, my role is actually to come and help you do this. And yes, and which is very good. It's what we do, why we do it, how we do it, and how we do it better. And that final thing, this is how we either save you X amount or contribute to key agendas. Because all authorities, local authorities that sort of procure services and they have strategic aims for all of their directorates, whether it's older people, health, young people, etc., etc., etc. And I think the way in which we can speak to that will help them to listen. But I think so in part, what we have, or what I've been trying to, I won't say what I've been trying to do in having these discussions with organizations, but perhaps have not made it clear enough. Actually, we want to recognize that you are not as human resource rich as you'd like to be. And writing impact reports takes time when you could be serving somebody who's presenting or somebody who's been coming to you for a long while. But we want to help you create these social value reports, and we can at some point quantify it in terms of pounds and pence. But there are other ways of quantifying value. I've said it all along since I've been here. Nicola Lynch has said it. Others said it. It's not always simply about a pound and pence. So the sense of relief that you will bring to somebody who thought, how am I going to get out and eat today, or am I going to see anybody this week? That is quantified beyond pound and pence. It's a bit like falling in love. How do you measure that in pound and pence, or when you have a grandchild or a child? And I am a bit emotional about that. But it is valid. But it is valid to have a system to create and report. But that is in part, I think. If you see I'll just quickly share with you very quickly what I would have. And this will take all of 1 minute. Bear with me. These. Is that sharing? It is. So we'll go back. So I take it you're all seeing this. We got to there. That's what I was going to ask you. What can we do for you to improve these things? I think you've begun to respond to that, Helen. I think others we could have a show about, but that's kind of what we want to ask. And then the question about procurement. I mean, are they funded enough? Are they funded at all? Are there ways in which we can be brought into the sort of matrix so we can inform how things are procured? So that literally was the discussion that we wanted to have. Let's just go back there. But this key thing, I think you've been very eloquent and in saying. So now I hope when I ring people and say, can we? Let's have a date. Part of what we've offered in terms of we've created a very simplified matrix for capturing social value. We've tried it on ourselves, tried it on one or two others. We simply just want people to say, give us a couple of hours of your time. We will talk you through some things. We'll get this information and we'll create a report for you. But I want to pick on Kristen, if that's all right, because I know you're sort of a stats data person, and so you operate within an organization that has these limitations. I mean, is there a response that we can collectively create to that to organizations to help them create these vital reports?
Sorry, could you repeat that, Hugh?
So I'm bringing on you because I know when we've met at CPT, and I know part of your remit or focus is on collecting data and stats and so on and so forth. But it is an issue that most organizations don't have a person sitting down, and I'm not saying that's what you're doing at all, but is there a way in which we can help make the reporting of social value and impact reporting easier for organizations like yourself and others across the borough? And they will be smaller than you, because you guys are not as small. You think they'll be smaller than you, who have 0 staff, etc.
I think it's something that we're struggling with now at the moment as well, Tracy. Like we try and capture as much as possible. So we have all our spreadsheets, we have different people trained, but I think now we're looking at views to try and have something that's kind of puts everything together, because it seems very fragmented. But yeah, that's what we're looking at the moment is views, and just something that can help bring everything together and to save us some time.
Louise has thank you. So I thought we would have ended slightly earlier. I mean, it was timetable to 11:30, but I think the feedback and the question and the response and it's been very good. So
it's fine. I'm sorry. Yeah. I need to jump off just
that's
fine.
Can I say
today is a bit bonkers for me, but it's been really lovely meeting you all today. And if there's anything I can try and help with, I'm open. Connect to me on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. Let's keep the dialogue going. Anything we can do to try and help. Can't solve everything, but I'll certainly have a go. Okay.
I'll give you a quick bit of feedback, Louise, about something that I think has come from I didn't realise that it was the wind of change and things that were moving along, but we have been involved in the initiative from LSEC and the local NHS partnership, bringing autistic and people with SDN.
Into the
group. There were 7 placements, I think it was, at the 6 of those were Casper young people.
Well done.
One has just been offered a full-time paid And
Oh, I've got goosebumps.
It's been absolutely incredible. And that was literally the college reaching out to SEND reaching to Casper, Casper responding, recruiting, and now it's taken off. So if that's part of this, then incredible, yeah.
It's same principles. It's about working in partnership to achieve what is better for the young people, for communities and what have you. So thank you for that feedback. That's given me goosebumps today. That's my moment today of like really good news. So I appreciate it. It's good to hear. I'll make sure I tell Rona when I see her in a bit, although she'll probably come and tell me later. She'll always come and tell me stuff. So it's been really nice to meet you all. Thank you for your time. If there is anything we can do to try and help in a similar kind of stretch education world, but a bit more funding, we'll do what we can. Okay. Nice to see you, Hugh.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Louise.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Yeah. Okay, fine. We're probably about to wrap up now. I must apologize that the feedback link was not working, and we tried it and it was working. I went in there, took me a while. I went in there, tweaked it. It should be working, still not working. Apologies, and I know if we've missed these moments. But did anybody have sort of a final comment or say? And to go back to that question that I had asked, or had attempted to ask in that PowerPoint, which who else? I mean, who in terms of trying to solve this or make this better, and in terms of trying to better meet some of the things that you are doing around employability, around environment, who else do we need to have at a sort of round table discussion? Because I think there is an understandably quite, if not impassioned, certainly slightly frustrated sense that does the council really, do we need to tell them yet again what we do? Do they not know what we do? Or how do we make it clearer what we do, which is actually working together with the council's agendas, because we all have basically the same agendas, to see people do better. So there's no antagonistic sort of ratio. It's a very people, the same sort of people in the same borough. People want, and both the authority, I suspect the private sector and the voluntary sector want to see better benefits, outcomes for people. And certainly what I have heard very clearly, and I've heard it before, but it's been very clear today, is that it's really difficult to be a small organization and to be doing frontline delivery, doing your admin properly, chasing funders as one has to do, unfortunately, sometimes, and then also doing this type of thing. So I guess if there's a way in which we can make it better, and that's part of why when for those who we haven't had a talk with you yet, Helen, so perhaps we'll email you offline about how we can potentially come and help you do that. That's what we've been trying to do. And so we created a simplified version to the Tom's, I think, sort of suits big organizations, but the college is big. Lots of organizations have, under $1 million, under $500,000. Some have tens of thousands, some have a few thousands. So how do you embed practice and process in a much smaller organization?
I think that's the issue. I think that's the issue, because with us, with us small organisations, there's normally, I don't know, anything between sort of 1 and 4 people that are doing kind of that sort of work. Whereas in the larger organisations, the councils, the colleges, they've got one job, one focus. They can just, that's not my job. So this is my job, kind of. Whereas we're in our organisations, that's our job, kind of. It's not. We don't have fixed roles. Everything is our job. And also, I think, like we work with smaller organisations than us.
Yes, like.
And for us, it's difficult to get the information from them. We can see the impact that they're having, but they're so small, they can't gather that information, or kind of, we're having to put our staff with them to work with them to gather that information, and that's just the basics. So kind of I don't know who we need around that table. We do need council officers around the table, but we also need funders and other people that kind of like sort of make the policies and make I just think that kind of when you're a community group working how we work, we shouldn't have to demonstrate our impact.
No, I fully take on board, and I won't mention the name of the group, but when you mentioned small, there's a group you introduced me to. Despite their problems, they would struggle as well. And I think, and if you're just talking, if we reduce it simply, let's talk about outcomes first. There are ways you can, and you know, there are ways you can design some very simple stuff to understand. This is where I was when I started on February 22nd, but 6 months later, this is where I am, and that's simple, but they
you
have
try
to
and get those forms completed, because
some ways just talk. You can, but we could discuss that because if you have a table and there's food and there's people talking about football or cricket or boxing, and you fit in some other questions, you'll get your. But there are different ways. But people have to understand that there's where you can almost sneak in these things, or you can almost report back on your observation. But that's another story for another day. But it certainly will be a struggle for organizations. And it's a bit like those who have to chase money from funders, and it's going to get even harder, unfortunately.
And they're the organizations that won't get funding but are doing the most important work, because there's no one there. They're so small, there's no one there to do the work for them. And so we're trying to help them by doing that, and then that's taken away from our resources. But we know that the work they're doing is so important, we have to help them.
Yeah, absolutely. So Helen?
Yeah, and this is why I'm committed to the Children and Families Forum, for example, because we bring people together. And this is why historically, well, in the last sort of 10 years or since I've been in the Bromley country sector, Community Links Bromley has failed in what I would say is the role of bringing together the sector and having a really powerful voice. Because just even thinking about listening to what Tracy's saying about their rent at Annerley Town Hall, we hire the cafe off of Bromley Voluntary Trust, Bromley Voluntary Sector Trust up at Community House. And they are being squeezed. The council's putting their rent up for that building. The council think they give it to them, because the mayor told me the other day when he was there, we decided to give the voluntary sector this building, years ago. I was like, pretty sure you didn't give it to them. But anyway, they're paying shed loads of money. And why isn't Tracy and their board and Ian and their board talking together, saying this is what the voluntary sector should be coming together, and all of the voluntary sector organisations that are hiring buildings should be then having a more powerful platform to talk to the local authority or whatever it is. But it's divide and rule, right? And there has never been a powerful voluntary sector organisation, umbrella organisation in the borough to really do that. The VSSN is so ineffective. It's just like, why are we all sitting here talking rubbish? There needs to be more glue, there needs to be more activism, and there needs to be more of a collective voice. And I think, Hugh, I've never met you before, I'm glad you're in post, but I think that's the only answer. We could be doing all these little tiny bits, and we're trying to help little organisations, and we're trying to help each other, but it needs to be a collective. And Bromley Third Sector Enterprise was a brilliant idea. But then again, that's another way the local authority can be like, oh yeah, but we deal with the voluntary sector. No, you deal with them 5. Like, come on, like, let's get real. It's like, we've got that. The bit that they are with, we give money to the voluntary sector, we give it to Community Links. So where does it go? What's it? Anyway, I rant on about that, but I just think it's about us being more. It's
very interesting. Yeah, I was only going to ask you, out of curiosity, have you been in the borough for a very long time? But it sounds like but it seems like you're saying that there's almost
20 years.
20 years, which is long enough. I was going to say it's almost like a mandate or a cause. Can we have CLB, for instance, which more effectively brings the sector together to speak with their unified voice, to speak to the powers that be, but also to represent and to talk about that impact. And it seems to be that you're saying that there's a historic issue of that not being done as well. And that's an important piece of feedback. By the way, did you fill out the should have asked you all actually. Did you fill out the state of the sector survey? Because if you haven't, you should.
As far as I recall.
Yeah, because that type of thing, I'm not sure, I can't remember if it asks that kind of question, to be honest, brutally honest. It doesn't take long to fill out. But I think, whereas it's not necessarily easy to hear that, but I think it's important to hear that, because it almost gives you a sense of fire. Okay, this is what we need. And that's why when you go back to my earlier thing of what would I have, that's the electric car, I think it wasn't me trying to be facetious. There's people who don't come on these things and don't respond and don't come to a range of things, but I think I know are out there. I know they're out there in Biggin Hill, in parts of Penge, and go on and A, to go and find them, B, to go and collect with them, B, to make them part of it. is part of, and it hasn't quite happened for me yet. But I know that there's a lot more. And it's not necessarily because you want to see 100 people on these things, but there are lots of groups out there who you need to connect with, you need to have a relationship with, so you can start building that collective voice. And that's a challenge. And my fear would be, if we don't get that right, then the future might not be as rosy as it could be, because society, the pandemic has brought opportunities. I know people have got funding and blah 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 and great, but also it will create challenges for everyone. I was on a call last week, and Tudor Trust, for instance, won't be making new grants for a year come April. I said, you what? And all they did is just like everybody else, they front loaded their funding. So we're closing up now, but I'm saying, if we don't get better at certain things, or be more collective, or be cleverer, then 2 to 3 years time, when the real impacts of begin to be felt, what will it be for voluntary groups, etc. But I want to thank you there. We have overrun slightly. I do apologize, but I also apologize for not being able to get that link to work. I don't know why, but I will try and send you some feedback within the next sort of hour. So I'll be very grateful if you could. Your feedback would be invaluable, as has been discussed. I think it's a very rich discussion, and I'm very glad for it. Thank you all. I suspect we might not have another one until after Easter, but we'll keep you in touch.
Thanks you. Thank
you. Thank you. Good to meet everyone.
So much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.